Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all having a fantastic Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining me today here on Behance. If you're tuning in on YouTube, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so you can chat along. And a big welcome to everyone joining us in the chat today. We've got Cody and Laura and Jodor Maya. If I mispronounced your name, I do apologize. Sam and Umacorn, great to see everyone. If you are tuning in, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. I always love seeing people from all over the world tuning in to these streams. It's wonderful. Brings the community together and it teaches you all, hopefully, some great tips and tricks. Golden Rose and Brett and Abir, great to see everyone. Lindsay, familiar faces, new faces. All right, so Masterclass number, I think it's number 39. We've done these for a long time, 39 weeks and counting. So let's go ahead and hop over to my screen. If you are new to Adobe XD, these sessions are a little bit more in depth than some of the other beginner sessions, especially the daily creative challenges. So if you want to kind of catch up and get the basics, head on over to letsxd.com. We've got a ton of content. Myself, Matt Ray, Danny Beaumont, and Danny has a great series on getting started in XD right here. Afroja from Bangladesh and Abir from Egypt. This is what I'm talking about. All over the world. This is wonderful. And once you've mastered some of the basics, there's videos and guides on some of the more advanced features, using components and repeat grids, 3D transforms, which is one of my favorite new features. It's wonderful. All right, so what do we have going on today? Well, we are going to be designing out, I just tweeted it. Let's see if I can bring up my tweet very quickly. Here we go. So we're going to be designing out something like this. It's a manga-inspired storefront or browsing experience. You can use it for comic books or whatever it is you might want to design, right? So we're going to be designing something like this for the web, and of course you can adapt it to mobile as well. So let's go ahead and hop over to Adobe XD and we are going to get going. So since this is going to be a web-focused project, I'm going to start with a web template. And you know, some people like to start with 1280, 1366. I like starting big, and then if I need to, I can always, add some padding on the side or, bring it down later on. But big is pretty good. Here we go. All right. So we've got our canvas looking nice, and I'm going to go ahead and just name this home. I always want to keep my artboards and my layers up to date. Sometimes I slip a little bit, but you know what? We're going to start and we're going to keep things organized. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to start top to bottom, and we're going to start with a little bit of a navigation bar at the top. It's going to be pretty simple. Then we're going to work our way down. We're going to be adding a lot of content to this web page. So what I'm thinking at the top left-hand corner, possibly some sort of a logo, right? Umacord says, I love kanji. I've been studying kanji a lot. I've been doing a lot of Japanese lessons, and kanji is difficult, but you can, when you start to try to figure out what exactly that looks like, even though it's not directly related, it kind of works. Like the kanji for neko, if you look at it, actually, let me go ahead and switch over to this, I think. So if I go ahead and choose the kanji for neko, right? This one here. Neko means cat, by the way. Let me go ahead and bring this up. If you look close enough, at first glance, doesn't look like much, but if you look close enough, and if you really kind of train your mind to look differently, this over here, this character here, these sets of strokes, looks like a cat kind of standing on its legs, and it's about to knock over some sort of ornament from this table. That's what cats do, right? So you gotta kanji is difficult, but you gotta kind of find ways to visualize what that could be. So this is cat, neko, right? So what I'm thinking, maybe at the top left-hand corner, since we're on this kanji and hiragana train, right? Maybe we'll just put something simple. So maybe the Japanese phrase for read manga, for example. So that would be manga, and then o yomimasu, right? I believe that's it, possibly. Nope, I did that wrong. Manga o yomimasu. There we go, that's a bit better, I think. Perfect, so we've got our logo. And we're going to pop this at the top left corner. And what I'm thinking now is I may not necessarily want all the elements of this web page extending to the very end, because if you're viewing, on Safari or Chrome, and typically if you have a widescreen display, 16 by 9, 1920 by 1080, the content very rarely goes all the way to the end, right? So I'm going to go ahead and set up some guides. I'm just going to rough kind of eyeball it. Let's go for about let's go for about 200. We'll go for an even 200, right? And of course you can use your grid system and all that fun stuff as well. There we go. So 200 on each side. Yeah, okay. So for this one, it's not very exciting right now. So we're going to make a few changes. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set it nice and bold. And then maybe for, one of the sets of maybe just the word manga, for example, we'll set that to a nice reddish pink. And then the rest of it, maybe actually O, because that's the particle. Maybe I'll just set that to about gray. I don't know if this logo is going to work, but we're gonna run with it and see what happens. And we'll set this dark, right? So we've got manga o yomimasu right here, read manga, and I'm going to pop that. That looks okay. I think we're going to run with that. And of course, we can always replace this later. Now, one thing I also want to do as I'm designing these projects is start to save some of my character styles and my assets and colors and things like that. So in the libraries panel, I'm going to go ahead and press the plus button beside colors. It's going to add all the colors that I just defined within this logo to my assets. So at any point, if I decide to shift this red a little bit, I'm going to right-click edit, and then I can just change it, and it'll only change that bit there, right? Maybe I'll add a little bit of pink in there. All right. So that looks pretty good. And then over to the right of this logo, we may want some links to go to various sections on this web page. So I'm going to go ahead, press the T key, and I'm going to type out, let's say, genres. Oh, I should probably turn off, go back to the US keyboard. There we go. Okay. And then for the typeface, I'm thinking, I use Poppins a lot. I've used a lot of different typefaces. I'm going to go for Sophia Pro. It's a pretty simple typeface. It's nice looking. Maybe we'll go for a nice semi-bold. And then for the size, let's try 24. And I stress this all the time, right? Whenever you're designing, especially if you're designing zoomed in like this, just go ahead and launch that preview or zoom out, just so you have a better understanding of how things look when a user is going to be taking a look. Hey, Richard, welcome. Great to see you. So I'm thinking it's not bad, right? Maybe I'll try medium, and I'll make sure this lines up. All right. And this one is going to be, all these links are probably going to be inactive at the moment because we're on the home page. So I'll set it a nice gray color. And then what I want to do to help me add more links very easily and keep them all spaced out is I want to put this link into a group. So Command and Control G, whoops, that's Command and Control H, Command and Control G, and then I'm going to call this links. And now what I want to do is over within the properties inspector, I'm going to go ahead and hit that stacking icon right here to enable a stack. It's going to define it as a horizontal stack by default. Of course, if you had multiple layers and they were going down the artboard, then it would define it as a vertical stack. So I can go in here now, click on the genres link and simply duplicate, and now I have 3 different links. And if I hover my mouse in between any of these layers, I can hold down my shift key and adjust the spacing of these links like that. 40 might be too little, 48, yeah, 56. That could potentially work. I don't know what the next one is. 8 times something. I don't know. We're running with this. And then this one is going to be series, and maybe if there's a premium experience on this service, premium, right? There we go. And another benefit of stacks, as you just saw, is as you're typing out and changing text labels and things like that, or the sizing of objects, then everything else beside it, or if it's a vertical stack above and below, will move out of the way as you're rearranging. And you can just jump in and move the links around like that. All right, let's go for, I don't know, set it that. That looks okay. Probably gonna make some changes to it, but I wanna also make sure to select one of these text layers and also add a character style in my assets. That way, If I do want to change the typeface, maybe I want to go for, let's say, Proxima Nova. I can very easily do that. Semi-bold. Let's try 22. That could work as well. It's not much of a difference, honestly, if you go back to what I had for Sophia, right? And then Proxima Nova, small difference, but this is what we do as designers, right? We can sit here for hours just tweaking little typeface adjustments, and at the end of it, we always go back to what we started with, usually. All right. Now over to the right of this navigation bar, we may want a way to very quickly access our user settings or our profile. So what I want to do here is maybe just to make my life a little bit easy, just grab an icon. So I'm going to go to my plugins panel at the bottom, go to the icons for design plugin, and I'll just type out user. There's a lot of different user icons. This one's pretty good, this awesome icon. And I'm going to drag it all the way over to this side here, make sure it lines up with the text layers, and it looks like it does. And I may possibly want to try out this pink. That could work. It stands out, but not too much. And then maybe to the left of this, we may want a way for users to search for content. So one more time, in my plugins, I'm going to type out search. And of course, a search icon is super simple to create, right? But I'm lazy, so I'm going to do this. All right, Brett says using stacks for navigation bars has been super helpful, right? Stacks is just incredibly helpful. Hey, Ruben, welcome. So I'm going to set this to a nice gray. We don't want the search bar to stand out too much. I mean, depending on the service, you absolutely may want it to stand out a lot. But for now, we're going to try something like this. And then, what are you looking to read? We'll do something like that. We're going to stick with, did we change it to Proxima Nova? We did, okay. So we're going to go back. Let's actually try the same character style. Might be a little large, to be honest. So let's drop it down to about 16. I'm going to make sure to use the same color here. Move this over, and I may just want a very simple line underneath. So I'm going to grab the line tool and drag one on out. Right click, apply as border, and now we have a search bar. It's all right. I may want to drop this opacity a little bit of this line. It's not the greatest looking search bar. We can of course add animations and things like that, but for now, I'm going to leave it at this. I'm going to make sure to group all of these elements. You can also turn it into a component if you're going to be using, you know what, I'm going to turn it into a component. Because I may be using the search bar across multiple screens. I can also, create a component of the entire navigation bar itself. So I'm going to go ahead and make a component, search, to move this over a touch, and there we go. So, Space Football, it's a great username, by the way. How do you align text and icons? Do you center them to look good or baseline? I mean, it depends on the project, right? So for this one, I basically just centered it vertically. But of course, depending on what you're doing, if the icons are, I try to make the icons about the same size as the text. And if we do get around to a user menu over here, you'll probably see that in action. And Marwa's saying, what are you going to be creating today? We're creating, oh yeah, Cody's got it. It's a manga-focused storefront experience. All right, so that's looking okay. Not perfect, but it'll do, right? So now the navigation bar is complete, I'm gonna make sure to group all of these elements. You can also turn it into a component if you want. And there we go. And going back to what Brett was talking about, using stacks on navigation bars, in addition to the stack that we have for the links, we can also enable a stack on the entire navigation bar. So if we wanted to shift things around like this, maybe move the search bar over to the left or beside the logo, we can very easily do that, or just move it, like this, right? So stacking makes the process so much simpler. All right, so we've got our navigation bar looking pretty good. And now the next thing we might want to add is, there are a few things, but maybe at the top, there might be an area that shows you featured books that you can either read or buy or whatever it might be. This is going to be a pretty simple area. So I'm going to grab the rectangle and draw one out. I'm going to snap it to the center, but then I'm going to just bring it back just a little bit. I can also go ahead if I want to and just like subtract in the properties inspector. If I'm very particular, maybe subtract by 8, right? And these are going to be a little bit thinner than some of the other sections that we're going to be designing. And I might want to round out the corners just a touch. Let's go for, I don't know, let's try 16 pixels. And I think that could possibly work, right? All right. So we've got one, and of course we're definitely going to add another one over to the right, but we're going to start with one, and there's a few things we might want to add on this. So the first thing, of course, is an image. So if I hop over to Finder, and you're going to see a lot of different ways of adding images to rectangles and shapes and things like that throughout this stream today. I'm going to go into the banners section, and I do have some fun looking banners I might want to use. This one from One Piece, drag that in there. And now on top of this, I might want some information about this particular book, right? So this is going to just be mostly a template at the moment. So I'm going to grab my text tool, featured book, or it could be maybe it's a volume, right? And we're going to make this nice. We're going to go, let's try extra bold, see what that looks like. Change it to white and then enlarge it quite a bit. Let's try 40. It's pretty large, but I think it could work. We really want to get people's attention. Now, what you're probably noticing now is that it's very difficult to read this white text layer against this image in the background, right? Of course, this guy has this massive smile, and the text kind of overlaps. So there are a few ways we can go around that, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But right down below, we may want a little bit of sub information. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller by dragging on that handle. Since this is more of a subheader, I can go, maybe I'll drop it down to semi-bold. I don't want to go too small, because then it'll be a little bit difficult to read, especially, even if we put the overlay on the background. And this might be, maybe how many pages, for example? Let's say 445 pages. That's probably way too many pages, but that's fine, right? So, like I mentioned, right, it's hard to read. So one of the things you can do is you can add, depending on the image in the background, I typically don't like adding shadows on text, but you can get away with it, a very subtle shadow. If you blur it a little bit, it just adds a little bit, right? No shadow, shadow. It's very difficult to see the shadow, and that's a good thing. But it does add a little bit of a contrast between your text and any white areas or lighter areas behind it. Beer is saying, can we wire up some overlay artboards to many objects at the same time? Overlay artboard, you can actually. That's the point of overlays. If I'm understanding your question correctly, is that you can just have one artboard with that overlay, and then you can just wire it up from many different triggers on various artboards. Maybe I'll show you that at some point. So it's looking a little bit better, but still not there yet. So what I'd like to do is just add an overlay, and you can add the overlay on top or below this layer. So if you duplicate this, I'm going to just name one overlay in my layers panel, and I'm going to change the color to black. And there are two ways of doing this, right? You can have it on top and just decrease the opacity just like that. Looks kind of fun. Or what you can do is just drop it behind and then grab the image layer and decrease the opacity like that. Basically the exact same thing, right? We're gonna leave it at this only because it'll make it a little bit easier to add in an image. Now, one thing that I'll point out, if you're into background blurs, like I certainly am, you'll want this layer on top. So you can add a background blur like that. Maybe I'll drop the brightness to 0, blur it a little bit, and then I'm gonna go ahead and increase the effect opacity to bring in some of that original color, right? It looks okay. I probably wanna stay away from the background blur in this example, only because we kind of wanna see all the details of this image. So I'm gonna put this one behind, drop the opacity, 40, possibly 50. Let's try for 40. I think there's a nice amount of contrast there. And then what I want to do is make sure to group all of these elements, Command and Control G, and this will be, let's say volume or featured card. All right, so we have one in place. Now, of course, we want a second one, and this is where stacks come back into things. Of course, you can use a repeat grid, but for this example, let's go ahead and use a stack one more time. I'm going to group this group. So we have a much larger group, and it's going to be called featured. And then I want to turn on stacking just like I did with the links at the top. And now duplicate, and there we go. And of course I can change the spacing, 16 pixels. That should snap perfectly. It does. And then I can dive in here and find one more. There we go. Beautiful. All right, that looks pretty good. Oh yes, Hugh says the sound, yeah, this, I was using the Japanese keyboard and it did not take that properly. There we go, much better. Thank you, Hugh. All right, problem solved. All right, so we have both of our volumes at the top, and of course, because we're using stacks, we can very easily rearrange these if we need to. And let's just see what this looks like if I bump this up a little bit. 50, 60 looks okay. It could work. Definitely have to play around with it and see. And of course, depending on the image, you may want to alter those overlays just a touch. But pretty happy with the way things are looking up here. All right, and we will be adding some more content up here at the top, but I do want to move on to some additional things down here at the bottom. And this is going to be for maybe the newest series or volumes that have been released. So I might want, let's say, 5 going across my artboard. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab a rectangle, and I could, drag one out like this and kind of eyeball it. But going back to, I think Richard was saying that he didn't know that XD can do math. So what I typically like to do in this case is drag out a rectangle all the way across to my guides, and then in the properties inspector right here, I can just, let's say I want 5 of these books going across, right? I can just divide by 5, and then I have something that will fit perfectly with 5. Now, of course, we may not want it to fit exactly perfectly, because if we have a repeat grid, right, we would have to have 0 spacing for it to snap properly into place. So in that case, in addition to the divide by 5, I might just want to subtract 8, for example. And now, if I have a repeat grid, right, we've got a nice amount of space. I might want to maybe minus 16, something like that, right? All right, now to keep consistency, we do have rounded corners at the top on these particular volumes. So we're gonna also round out the corners. Now, because this is a smaller shape, you may find that 16, which is the same rounded corners that I used up here, you may find that this 16 looks a little bit off. So there are 2 things you can do. You can either match it visually, which doesn't always work, right? And drop it down to about 8. Or you can dive in here and also change these to 8, just to kind of keep consistency across everything else, right? And by the way, I did see a plugin. I think it's a preview. I don't think it's out yet. Let me just double check. Manage plugins. I believe it's called X-Ray. No, not out yet, but there's a plugin that one of the developers teased this morning called X-Ray that will allow you to find all of your rounded rectangles, for example. And it looked like from the preview, you'll be able to select all of them and change the corner radius all at once, just to keep consistency. That could be interesting. So I'm gonna keep an eye out for that. All right, so we've got this looking okay, right? And I'm gonna go ahead and, just to set this up, I wanna go ahead and press the repeat grid button at the top right. Go, and we can drag out a few more going across our artboard, right? And now we have 5 going across, and we may want some additional ones going down the artboard. So I'll just drag out a few. So we have 10 total, right? Sebastian is saying, why do you not use style guide first, or what step is it? So, I do have some, as I'm designing, I do have some character styles and colors and components that I'm saving as I'm going along. Typically, if I was doing an actual project for an actual client and not trying to cram everything in an hour, I would definitely set up a style guide first, do some mock-ups and wireframes and that sort of thing, and then build the design based on that. I just don't have time for some things like that. So we're just diving into things. All right, so we've got a repeat grid looking pretty good. Now, of course, one of the main benefits of repeat grids is that you can go in, grab a bunch of images, and boop. Fancy, right? Now we've got some volumes going across. We've got 5 and then 2 rows going down. Now, there are a few additional ways to, display more content for these particular volumes, right? One thing that I love to do is using overlays. It keeps things nice and clean and minimalistic. And then when you do want more information, you can just hover your mouse over top. Now, when you're working inside of a repeat grid, you want to be careful because you want to maintain the structure and the functionality of that grid. So what I typically don't want to do is select the image in the repeat grid and add that to a component. What I love to do is create overlays separately. So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna duplicate this particular image, and you can be in any of these cells. So Command and Control D, and this is gonna be called the overlay. And I'm gonna change the color to black. And you're gonna notice that because we're in a repeat grid, it's adding it to all the cells, which is wonderful, right? Rob Zilla is in the house. Welcome, Rob. All right, so we've got our overlay looking okay. Of course, just like the other one, we might want to decrease the opacity a little bit, or if we know that most of the information on this overlay is going to be towards the bottom, what we can do is work with gradients. So if I select the fill, change from solid color to linear gradient, at the top, we don't want red. We're going to set both to black, but the top one, we're going to decrease the opacity a little bit, right? That way, when we decrease the opacity of the overall layer, it's a little bit darker on the bottom and a little bit lighter at the top. Now, of course, this is just an overlay, so it's not going to appear all the time, only when you hover. So, you can kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Do you have, or you're going to do a design process video? That would be a good idea. I like that idea, David. I will definitely look into that. All right, so we have this here. Now we want some text. And again, this is all placeholder, templatized, right? So book title, it's a little bit large, so let's try 32, might work. And then below this, we might want a little bit more information. So this can be more, very similar to this, it's kind of like subtext. So drop that, we're gonna change from extra bold, let's try semi-bold. And here we might want maybe the genre of this book and possibly how many pages. There we go. All right, so now we didn't push it to all of them because I didn't create a new text layer, but that is totally okay. I can just do that. Bam. All right. Now, possibly down here, we might want some tags. If you've been on, manga or, even like Amazon, for example, sometimes they have tags that kind of relate to this particular book. So to do that, let's grab our good old rectangle tool. Shortcut key R, we're going to drag out our first tag. Let's go ahead and round out the corners completely to keep consistency. I'm going to try this red color. It may not work. What I might have to do is add a little bit of a border on the inside. I can always drop the opacity just a little bit. Maybe, possibly. We'll see what that looks like. We'll tweak it. And then on the middle, or on the inside of this tag, we're going to go ahead and type out tag. Make this nice and small, make sure it's centered. Possibly, maybe. Let's try bold. That could be a little bit better, right? All right, so we've got our first tag in place. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can use this tag across many of these overlays. We want to make sure that it can automatically resize as we're typing. And we also want to make sure that we can keep it up to date. So to do that, we're going to create a good old component. So I have both of these layers selected and then press the component button or plus button beside component. And this will be called a tag. And I can go ahead and, now what did I do? Oh, yes, okay. So this is an instance. I'm going to go ahead and make sure to edit the main component. And this one, I want to make sure that padding is turned on. And if I do need to, I can always adjust the padding directly in the Properties Inspector. Hey, Andrew, welcome. I can do that in the Properties Inspector, or I can do it directly on Canvas. I've got 5, 15. Let's go for 16, just like that. I'm going to make sure that this is left justified. And now, if I dive in here and make some changes, perfect. That's exactly what I want. All right, so I have my tag. I'm gonna go ahead and group this and call this tags and turn on a stack just like I did before, and boop, boop. 3 tags might work, and maybe just to show that we can have longer tags, long tag, right? Fancy. All right. It's getting there. I'm still not perfectly convinced that this red is the right color to use in this case, but we shall see. All right, now down here, we might want some buttons. Maybe this service allows you to subscribe to become a premium member, or it allows you to purchase the book directly. So let's make some buttons. Good old rectangle tool. We're gonna draw one out just like this. And since there will be two different buttons in this area, we want to start thinking about which button do we want to be the king and, the primary focus, and which one do we want to be secondary. So I'm thinking, subscriptions are probably what this service might want. So that's probably going to be the primary button. So let's start with that one. We're going to round out the corners just a little bit. Let's try 8. And for the fill, we don't have a blue color yet. So let's go ahead and define a nice actionable blue. Probably don't need a border, so we're going to turn that off for now. The rounded corners are looking a little bit too round, possibly. But we'll see. We can always drop that to about 4. We'll see. It'll be a component, so we can definitely make changes to it. And then on the inside, become a member. It's probably not very exciting text, but we're going to run with that. And maybe, to really help push this, we might want some sort of an icon beside it. So back in my icons, I'm going to type out, let's say, star. And of course, I can make my own star using the polygon tool. But some of these stars, like this one here, the weather star, they're okay. They're nothing special, though. Okay, let's make our own. So in here, we're going to grab the polygon tool, shortcut key Y, drag this down like that. And we're going to change the number of sides to 5. And we definitely want to pull in this little handle right here, which corresponds to the star ratio on the side. There we go. And I can round out the corners maybe just a little bit. Ooh, that's a bit too much. Let's try 0.3. And maybe for this one, we're going to go for a border-based icon. Something like that. And then we may want a little bit of a sparkle at the top. And this one's just very simple. Maybe a line like that. Round out the caps. Duplicate. Rotate 90 degrees. And we have a little sparkle. Right? Tiny little sparkle. I'll probably drop the size of this border to 0.5. And there we go. All right. We've got our fun little star looking good. Perfect. Make sure to group these, and I'm going to call this star. All right. This I'm going to bump up to extra bold because we definitely want people to see that. You know what? I'm not loving that star. It's not the greatest looking star in the world, but I don't know. It's just not working. No. Well, I can sit here for hours and just mess around with this star. Oh, we're getting there. It's taking shape. Okay. It'll do. That'll do, pig. That'll do. Again, not the greatest looking star, but we're gonna run with it. I don't want to waste too much time. All right. So, where are you getting inspiration for your tutorial? So a lot of, honestly, a lot of the ideas that I'm working on through these masterclasses come from suggestions on Twitter and YouTube and all those fun places. Some of them, I browse Dribbble a lot and Behance a lot. So I get a lot of inspiration from there as well. All right, so we have our first button looking decent. Go ahead and name this text, make sure this is centered. Much better. All right, so what we want to do, we want to turn this into a component so we can keep all of our buttons up to date as we progress. So Command and Control K, we now have a component. Now it is inside of a repeat grid, so it did create that as an instance of the component. So you can right click and you can go to Edit Main Component. It's going to bring it out here. And then here we may also want an outlined version of this particular button. So I'm going to go ahead and create one state over here, call it outlined. And then I'm going to dive in here. Instead of a fill, we're going to just simply turn off the fill, add a border. We're going to add a nice white border like that. And this might be just a purchase, right? And maybe this book is $9.99. And I may not need the star in this case. There we go. And now we have our two states. So if I dive in here to this button, I can duplicate one down. And what did I name that? Outlined? Wow, I did not spell that correctly. That's going to bother me. So I'm going to go ahead and just rename that. Much better. All right, so we have our 2 buttons. There we go. I think that could work. I may want to actually round, now that I'm looking at it, I think I may want to round out those corners a little bit more. So, benefit of components, just dive back in. I'm going to dive into the default state of the main component, and when I change the border radius, just like that, it's also going to affect the instances as well, because I did not manually override those, which is wonderful, right? All right. That's looking okay. I may want to make them a little bit longer, to be honest. Woo, just like that. Move that over. Let's check the outline state, move that over as well. All right, so our overlay is looking pretty good. I've done a terrible job at naming some of these layers, but don't pay attention to me. This will be purchase and member. That's looking pretty good. All right. So we have all the elements that are going to make up this overlay, but of course we don't want it to be visible at all times in this repeat grid. So what we're going to want to do, we're going to want to take all of these elements and turn them into a single component. So I have them all selected inside of my layers panel, and I'm going to hit the plus button beside component, just like that, right? And now I'm going to go ahead and edit the main component right here. Now, there will be 2 states, right? There's going to be a default state and our hover state. So in the default state, I'm going to make sure to dive in here. Let me first make sure everything is lined up properly. It looks like it probably is. And I can also go ahead and grab these buttons, pop them into a group, call it buttons, turn on stack, just in case at some point in the future, someone wants these buttons to be rearranged. I can always drag that just like that. All right, so we've got our default state good to go, but what we want to do is we want to have it not visible on, initially, right? So I'm going to select all of these layers here and simply drag the opacity. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pop them all into a group to make it easier, because some of the layers already have altered opacities, and just drag it down to 0, right? And then what we want to do, we want to create a new state, which is going to be a hover state. And if you haven't used XD's hover states before, they are wired up by default, which is what that lightning icon indicates to the right. So you don't have to do anything separate, although you may want to. I'll show you that in a second. So I have that, and now that that state is active, I'll just drag it back to 100%, right? So we have our default state and our hover state. And if we dive into this repeat grid, we have that component here. Just rename this, there we go. And I can toggle default state and hover state. And again, because we're working inside of a repeat grid, it's gonna show it on all the cells, at least in design mode. But when you actually preview it, like I'm gonna do right now, and you can just hover over individual ones just like that. Now, I mentioned earlier that the hover states are wired up by default and you don't have to do anything separately. Typically you don't, for most cases. But you may want to change the animation just a little bit, because on this one, we really don't have anything that's going to be animating, right? So we want to be able to just hover our mouse over each of them and just have that overlay appear instantly, right? And in this case, it's not, because there's a slight animation, so it's fading that overlay in and out. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the main component again, this one right here. And we're going to switch over to prototype mode. And from our default state, we already have the hover wire, right? So we don't have to add anything separately. We simply need to change the type in the properties inspector to transition, and then animation to none. And because we edited the main component, it's going to push all those changes to all the other ones. So now if we preview, we can very easily just hover over all of them and they appear instantly, right? All right. So Islam is saying, I didn't use Adobe XD for a while. How can I remember? So we've added, I don't know how long you haven't used it for, but we've added a ton of new features over the last year. We have a lot more coming, especially in the prototyping world. So stay tuned for that. But letsxd.com, great place to find out what's new, find out, catch up and all that fun stuff. All right. So this is looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. I may want to add a little bit of a header right up here, maybe hot. Whoops, I can't see it. Let's change that color to black, where I do have in my assets that color that we've been using. Let's bump this up to about 24 possibly. hot off the press. Is 24 too small? Oh, actually, it's not too bad. I might want to space out the characters just a little bit. That could, maybe 24, maybe 32. No, I think that's too big. 24 looks pretty good. All right. That looks nice. And then what we might also want to do is add a header here. There we go. Perfect. And now if you want to make sure that you can, keep all these things grouped up and also rearrange them as you need to, you can turn a stack on this entire group. So I'm going to go ahead and select both of these, group them, whoops, call this featured, group these two, call this new, and then I can select both of these and put those into a group and just call this maybe content. That way, like we've done a million times already, we can turn on a stack. This time it defined it as vertical, and I can just rearrange these if I need to. If we want, maybe, I don't know why you would want to do this, but if you wanted the featured volumes down at the bottom, you can do that, right? Probably doesn't make sense in this case, but you can do it. Now, one thing I do want to showcase is how you can use a plugin like the Google Sheets plugin to very quickly bring in content. So let me duplicate this artboard over here just so we can see everything at once. And I'm gonna go ahead, just for now, I'm gonna hide this. And this repeat grid, we're going to explode. So we want something a little bit different in this particular case. Just like that. And then I'm going to ungroup this grid just for now. And in this case, we don't want the hover overlay. What we're going to do, we're going to add some content down below. I'm also going to just get rid of this image just for now, change this to whatever. And then down below, this is going to be the, let's say the series. And 32 might be too large in this case. Let's go for 24. And extra bold, because it's such a small text layer, extra bold might be a little bit too thick, so let's go down to bold. We'll try that. And then down below, we may want maybe how many volumes, right? So this might be just 50, let's say. Make this a little bit smaller. 16 might be too small, but we'll try that. And let's go for regular. Possibly. That might be a little bit small. All right, so we have some information down here, right? And we want to be able to very quickly add content to the repeat grid that we're about to create, right? So we've got this image. We also have this series and how many volumes. I want to make sure to pop these all in here. We don't need a group in this case, so I'm going to ungroup that. Perfect. Okay. Now, what we're going to be doing, we're going to be using Google Sheets. So let me actually hop over here so things make a little bit more sense. So here's a Google Sheet I've been working on, and it has a few columns. It has a bunch of series. It has how many volumes inside of that series, and it has a cover image. Now, you're going to want to take note of the headers. So we have series, volumes, and cover. To make your life a lot easier if you're using the Google Sheets plugin, make sure to name your layers appropriately. So in this case, this image here, I'm going to name cover to correspond with the column in Google Sheets. This I'm going to name, or make sure it's named series, and this one here, volumes. Plural? Yes. Okay. So now that that is all done, we can go ahead, just like we did in the last example, we can go ahead and select these layers and hit the repeat grid button at the top, boop, just like that, and drag a few out. Right? We've got our 5 going across and 5 down, or 1 row extra down. There we go. Perfect. All right. So now that we have this done, how do we get content in? Now, the last example I showed you how to grab images in Finder, pop those directly in. You can also do the same thing for text layers, text layers, yeah, but for text files as well. So we have series, for example. I can drag this directly onto this text layer, and volumes, I can do that as well, right? And that's great if you have control of that content. But a lot of times, if you're a designer working on larger teams, you're working with people who controls that content. They love creating spreadsheets. I personally don't enjoy it, but a lot of people do. And spreadsheets are used a lot to pass data along to different teams. So someone might send you this, a simple spreadsheet with all the information. I'm gonna go ahead and copy this link, and then back in Adobe XD, we're gonna hop into the plugins down at the bottom, and we're going to go to the Google Sheets plugin, which is right here. If you don't have it installed, hit the plus button at the top. I'm gonna go in there, Google Sheets, select a source. You can go ahead and link your Google Sheets account or a Google account to this plugin. I personally don't. I don't like linking accounts. Or you can paste the public URL and import. So it's going to grab all that content that's inside of that Google Sheet, and it's also going to do its best to map out the layers to the columns, which is why it's so important to name things correctly, right? As you can see here, volumes will map to volumes, series to series, and cover to cover. Now, of course, if you let me actually go ahead and I'm catching myself. I don't have the repeat grid selected. I want to select the repeat grid. And I'm going to go ahead and import again. But if you did not name your layers correctly, you can go in this panel and just manually map it out here. So everything's mapped out perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and press apply and bam, right? So it grabbed all the information from this Google Sheet and put it directly into my design, right? And of course, because we're working in a repeat grid, you can still make changes. So I have this number that's kind of floating at the bottom here. It doesn't tell me what this number is. It's just a number. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hop in here. I'm gonna grab my text layer, type out volumes, right? And position it aside. Now, it looks good here. It looks good here, right? But what you're gonna notice is if you have, let's say this one down here, 4 volumes, there's this weird space because it's basically syncing the position of this volumes text layer across all the cells in the repeat grid, which in some case will work out perfectly. But we want to make sure that if you have a number that's smaller or larger than this 2-digit number here, it's going to automatically adjust. So that's where stacks come into play again. I'm going to make sure to select this and this layer here. I'm going to group them together, call this volumes, and I'm going to turn on a stack. It's going to define it as a horizontal stack. 8 pixels is probably fine. And this up here looks exactly like it did before, but if we scroll down here, we now have proper spacing in between these ones as well. Now, if I go back over here, let's say myself or someone else changes some of these values, let's say this will be 923 volumes. That's probably a lot, but what you can do now is hop back over here to your plugin, refresh. It's going to apply all the changes. Which one was that? Demon Slayer. Where is it? Where are you? It didn't change. Oh, you know why it didn't change it? Because I messed up the groups. That is why it did not change it. Let me see something. Yeah, I messed up the groups. Bad, Howard. But if you did not mess up the groups like I did, it would change that text layer. But I can dive in here, 923, right? What did I do? Volume, oh, stacking got turned off. Why would stacking get turned off? Now it's on, right? 923 or 42, whatever. There we go. And it automatically resizes, right? Fancy. So someone's adding, can you add a favorite button which would maintain the state of favorited if tapped in the repeat grid? You can actually. So if you wanted to, like, let's actually go to, do you want to add it to the overlay? Would that make sense? It might. Let's try it. So inside of this overlay, for example, we may want to add a bit of a heart icon. That could be the favorite, right? So I'm going to go ahead and grab my polygon tool, shortcut key Y, drag out a polygon. Now, if you don't know what I'm getting at, you're probably wondering, why are you dragging out a polygon if you want to create a heart? Well, take a look at this. In the Properties Inspector, where the number of sides are, instead of 3, you want to put less than 3, which is that little, ASCII heart, and then press return. It adds a heart. And maybe for this one, it'll be border-based. Increase that a little bit. This heart's probably a little bit too large. There we go, and we'll put it at the top right-hand corner. This probably isn't well thought out. I'm kind of just running with it, right? And let's go ahead and turn the overlay on here, just so we can see how things are looking. It's not looking great, to be honest, but you know what? We're gonna run with it. We can also dive in and maybe set the fill to a little bit of a darker color, just so it has a little bit going on there. It's still not great, but let's run with it. So we have our inactive heart, right? And what we want to do now is have two states. Like, what was it, Amrit? Where were you? Someone asked the question. I can't find the question. It was there. So someone asked, you know, can you have two different states, right? So in this case, what we want to do is turn this into a component, and then we can edit the main component. Now this, because we're editing a component in a component, it created an instance. So we got to bring out that main component, and now we can create an additional state. New state, favorited, and this one, we're going to change to our nice red color. We're going to keep the white border just so that we have some nice contrast. And now we have default and favorited. Now, unlike our hover states, these are not wired up by default. So what you'll have to do now is hop into prototype mode, click on this component to spread out that little wire. Transition's fine. We're not having any sort of animation. We do want to choose the favorited state and no animation. And then from favorited, we can do the exact same thing going back to our default state, and transition is good. Perfect. So now, if all went well, let's go ahead and go back to the default state. We're going to press play, right? We've got all of the, by the way, I should probably point out that if you want to enable scrolling, just grab the artboard and bring it down. That handle to the left is your viewport height, so that anything above that will be visible immediately. Anything below is going to be visible upon scroll. And then we press play, right? And we can press the heart. Did I do a hover? I think I did, didn't I? That's not what I did. Huh. So you want to make sure that the trigger is set to tap and not hover. That's probably a little bit better, right? There we go. And we can click, and we now have our hover state, right? And it remains there, right? So if I go into another one, I can click on that one, go back to it. There's our hover state, or our favorited state. All right, we have a few minutes left. I do want to tackle one more thing at the top of this page, and that's going to be a list of genres or tags, for example, right? And that might go right up here at the top. There might be this kind of like a break section so that people can really see it. So I'm going to grab a rectangle. I'm actually going to break the bounds a little bit, drag something out here, and we'll just have a very light color back here. And then inside here, we basically want, it's almost gonna look like tags, right? So I'm gonna grab my rectangle, drag one out just like this. We'll round out the corners just a little bit. And maybe for these ones, we may want to add a little bit of a shadow. Now, shadows I talk about a lot, right? You wanna be careful with your shadows. Maybe I'll add a little bit of blue. Blur it a little bit more, very subtle shadow, right? Ooh, I don't like that. It's too big, way too big. Bring that in just like that. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a border on the outside. Very subtle border. Possibly. May not need it. That's still way too big. Again, this is the importance of previewing once in a while or zooming out. You know, in here, it looked okay, right? But that's way too big. So I'm gonna go back to here. That's a little bit better. Let's try without the border for now. Right, and then inside of here, we might just want genre. And we'll make this nice and semi-bold. 18 could potentially work. Maybe, possibly. I don't know how much I like this. All right, let's run with it and we'll see eventually. Of course, we're gonna turn this into a component, Command and Control K, and we've got our default state. We wanna make sure, now in this case, because I want all the genres and the tags to be the same size, I'm not gonna add any padding on it, but I do want to repeat grid, view, drag a few out, and I do have in Finder, very quickly, genres, I can just drag, or not. Oh, it's a component, that's right. Okay, let's not do that. What am I doing? Whenever I'm rushing, I lose track of things. I forget how to do everything. There we go. Oh, it wasn't centered. Oh, Howard. There we go. That's a little bit better. Now, of course, I'm gonna drag this in, make sure everything lines up. And there we go. I'm certainly not loving this area at the top. I would spend a lot more time working on this, maybe add like an overlay to add a bit of color to it. Yeah, that just looks ugly. This is what happens when you rush through things, but I'm gonna hide that. I'm gonna switch back to me. I wanna say a big thank you to everyone who has joined me today on this masterclass. I believe we're gonna be back next week with another masterclass. Thank you to Cody and Smith and Rob Zilla, Sebastian, Cornell, Adam, Afrosia, Arpad, Umacorn, and everyone else who has joined me. Stick around. In just a few minutes, we have, where is the schedule? I believe it is Paul. Paul's back. Paul was just on not too long ago, and now Paul is back again. So thank you, everyone, and I will see you all next time.